So, I'll always remember this period, of music as being the one where my musical focus was the most unfocused. But I really didn't have much choice. This is among the most unoriginal, bland, depressing periods in 20th century music, where music wasn't sure where it was headed, and therefore every song sounded like one long song with varying movements. Like this, the KLF, Technotronic, Crystal Waters, Tom Cochran, CNC Music Factory, Black Box. No one was selling pure cocaine, so we settled for mountains of musical crack.
Yes!
At this time, I was 13 and in the suburbs, so I didn't really know how to seek out underground music. It was listen to what they played on the radio or at the school dances, buy the tapes of the artists they played on the radio or at the school dances, wait for my jam to be played on the top 10 songs of the day on the radio and tape it with my tape recorder, or nothing. I didn't like this place. It wasn't enough for me to have a decent Chili Pepper song about heroin, an awesome LL Cool J track about how awesome he was, a moving U2 ballad, or a socially conscious Janet Jackson album. I needed more. During this music drought, I was the desperate owner of Third Base, Belle Biv DeVoe, Extreme 2, and Tony singles. I pretended EMF was the greatest thing since New Order. I pretended I didn't constantly confuse them with Jesus Jones. I once spent a whole week that I will never get back trying and failing to take Natural Selection's Do Anything off the radio, only to be repeatedly foiled by the DJ's premature outro or my mother calling me to get on the phone and say hi to Aunt Margaret. I sang along to Amy Grant. But this whole time, I was never in love with any of this crap, but tried like hell to be. Everyone around me was super into Color Me Bad, so I tried, but it rarely worked. I was so sick of the things everyone was too sexy for. I needed something else. I needed some kind of dirty, unpolished, musical messiah to swoop in, save me, and make it desirable to be gross and pissed, rather than some in-living color fly girl who was totally ready to jam. I didn't know at the time that it was about to happen, that our generation was about to be granted the definition we were waiting for. So until then, I would be the set of inflatable wings in a swim class full of bubble belts, waiting on the outside, looking in at everyone else as they busted the running man to Gerardo. I was in 7th grade during this time. No one I know was perfect in 7th grade, but I was a lab experiment gone horribly wrong. I had braces complete with rubber bands and a nighttime headgear, and was fat the way sidekicks in after-school specials are. My outfits were uniform, so in other words, flower-patterned shirt, flower-patterned elastic waist hammer pants, and made whoever owned Sears very wealthy. I could not do the aforementioned Running Man, or the Roger Rabbit, and on top of all that, I had a mustache. Okay, so mustache is probably an exaggeration. I was never mistaken for Burt Reynolds, and it's not like I could comb it. But it looked more like I had the kind of dirt stash a teenage Guido trying to grow a mustache has. And this didn't make it any more flattering, and as I entered my early teens, I wasn't the only one who noticed it. Mustache! Every day, for almost 5 months, this heat-seeking word sliced through the din of the lunchroom as I went up to empty my tray. There were 2 instigators of this verbal taunt, Nate and Jim, and in retrospect, they probably weren't the best candidates to be slinging the insults. Jim was painfully ordinary by every definition, and Nate's look captured every unflattering aspect of what a penis in a t-shirt might look like. But that didn't stop them. Sometimes their whole table joined in, sometimes they just flew solo, but every day, same thing. Mustache! Kill me. I tried several ways to order my own cease and desist. First, I tried convincing my friends to come up to the trash can with me, but they only claimed not to hear anything. I stopped eating so I wouldn't have a tray to empty, but this didn't work as they would just find where I was sitting and aim my new nickname in my direction. I became the I'm sick Maverick so I wouldn't need to go to school altogether, but my parents eventually noticed that something was up, so they urged me to go to my teachers. But my teachers were way off when it came to their perception of reality and their estimation of any teenager's ability to maturely and gracefully deal with this type of public humiliation. I mainly heard 3 textbook responses. Ignore them. As if that were anywhere near the realm of humanly possible. Maybe they're not talking to you. Fine. But considering I was the only person in 7th grade with a mustache, male or female, I don't know who else they could have been talking to. And my favorite, when they tell you that you have a mustache, it means they like you. Yeah, he was right. So I had officially exhausted all the usual options, done everything film strips and PSAs and sitcoms starring John Stamos had told me I should do. I had no other choice but to follow my instinct and do the only thing I thought would finally work. So standing alone in my kitchen one weekend, not sure I could handle another week, I pulled the lunch menu for the following week off the refrigerator, and I saw my answer. During lunch that following Monday, my hands shook and I had zero appetite. There was no way I had the balls to actually do this. I stared at the compartment of my tray that held what I had viewed as the answer in my kitchen that past weekend, a paper dish of chocolate pudding. Then I picked up my spoon and sank it into the pudding, gathering a heap of instant Jell-O's finest. I raised it to my lips and opened wide, please. I could never pull this off. No way, no how. Mustache! Yes, I could. I spared my pudding, borrowed a friend's uneaten pudding, and went up to empty my tray. I held on to the flimsy paper dishes bulging with chocolate ammo. I had a clear shot from the cans, which was at a safe distance from them, but I wanted to make a strong point, and I don't have a sniper's aim. So I marched right over to Nate and Jim, who were both facing me ready to dish out what I was no longer in the mood to take. It all happened pretty quickly. I don't think they even saw the pudding in my hands ahead of time. I wound up and simultaneously landed both dishes on both heads. I dropped the mic, I spiked the football. It was a deliciously satisfying equation. The force and speed of my wind-up, plus the flimsiness of the paper dishes, caused a pudding explosion, which hit not only Nate and Jim, but the rest of their occasional cohorts. I hadn't counted on this. I clasped my hands together and walked back to my seat to the sound of silence, immediately followed by uproarious laughter and applause. My face burned with pleasure and all the almost embarrassing accolades I was receiving. But adoration is fickle, and the joke only lasted as long as it took for the pudding to stain. I was still throbbing with adrenaline next period when the loudspeaker switched on. Achtung! My head snapped up as the usual list of bad apples were called to the principal's office, and just as I cracked a smile at the thought of Saturday detentions for the usual suspect, an unusual suspect was summoned. Dana Rossi. Well, shit. I walked into the principal's office. He was in the process of explaining my offense to my mother and father, who had been called in for the occasion. I took a seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. This was clearly the worst thing I had ever done. Principal Jones asked my dad how they planned to punish me at home, and I braced for impact. "We're not going to punish her," my dad answered. My head sprang up. "Actually, we're probably going to reward her." I was so shocked, I couldn't even muster a triumphant "suck it," but as I sat there, hairy mouth agape, Principal Jones snapped. "Well, she will most certainly be punished here. She'll stand in the corner tomorrow during lunch. I can't have the entire student body thinking they can just go around dumping pudding on people's heads. Who does your daughter think she is, the Queen of Mexico?" I don't remember learning that Mexico had a queen, but this is public school. My mother ignored that cleverly racist comparison and asked how Nate and Jim were going to be punished. "Well, the boys won't really be punished," Principal Jones declared. "The fact that they were publicly humiliated by a girl is punishment enough." Yeah, like, seriously. I stood in the corner the next day, and as I faced the wall, I felt a quarter hit me in the head and bounce to the floor. And then next, a nickel came flying from another direction and hit me in the arm before landing heads up. It took a second for me to realize that kids were pitching coins at me like a duck in a carnival game. And it took no time at all to realize that the lunchroom monitors weren't doing a damn thing about it. In the span of one day, I had gone from the height of admiration for standing up for myself to Joan of Arc being burned at the stake for the same reason. I bent down to pick up the change. Yeah. When suddenly something hit me that wasn't a form of currency. I was definitely on the outside, but the outside is where I was visible. I remember the early 90s as though we're still in it, and that span of 2 days like they happened at 3:30 today. I can still see what I wore, what the boys wore, the layout of the lunchroom, the hodgepodge of stalactite bangs, peg-leg jeans, banana clips, everything that festooned the teenage population. I remember how sticky my hands were. I can feel the hush that happened the second after the pudding exploded. I don't need reminders of those events or that time, the time just before the outside became the inside, before our entire generation would be clawing to be the ones who stood out for being uglier, angrier, and dirtier than now. Yet almost 20 years later, even as a hairless adult who no longer looks like Magnum P.I., occasionally a stray, coarse hair pops in on my upper lip to remind me that something that I easily forget, sometimes being on the outside isn't the worst place to be. Then I tweeze it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Soundtrack Series! Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful night and listening to that story about me being hairy. But let's get to it. So first up is a senior editor at VH1.com and a performer and teacher at the Upright Citizens Brigade, where she can be seen every Saturday night with the house team, Reuben Williams. She is obsessed with her cat, who is better than all other cats with obsessed owners. No, really. This is Kate Spencer.